This channel is part of the History Hit network.
Lady Diana Spencer leaves on her journey to marry Charles, Prince of Wales. His bride was just 21 years old. It was 1981. Charles, 13 years older than Diana, had dithered over his choice of bride for many years. They had first met 5 years ago when she was only 16. In the event, more than 700 million people watched the wedding. The fairy tale princess had taken the world by storm. For Diana, there was no doubt why she was marrying Prince Charles.
Diana was in love with Prince Charles, and she was in love with the idea of being in love. She's a romantic. She was just in love with the whole idea, and what more romantic thought for a young teenage girl than to marry a prince.
Diana's ancestral home is Althorp in Northamptonshire. She's a daughter of one of Britain's oldest and noblest families. Diana's father was an equerry to King George VI. Before inheriting the title Earl Spencer, the family lived on the royal estate at Sandringham, where Diana was brought up with her two sisters and younger brother Charles. When she was only 7, her parents separated, and after an acrimonious divorce, Diana was left in the care of her father.
Diana was a very young child. Her older sisters were away at boarding school. Charles was still in the nursery because he was younger still. And she very much became her father's great companion and indeed hostess. I mean, when he gave shooting parties, she used to help him organise the shooting lunches and so on, and really helped him run the house and run the family, and was extremely close to her father. And he absolutely adored her.
When Diana was 17, her father remarried, creating considerable problems for his youngest daughter.
When he married Rain Spencer, I think she felt a great sense of isolation and loneliness in that she never got on with her stepmother. Indeed, all the children resented the fact that they hadn't been allowed to see their father when he was desperately ill with a stroke. And a friend who was at Lord Spencer's wedding to Rain recalls driving away, seeing Diana standing completely alone, looking very miserable, leaning against a saddlestone. She'd lost her mother, now she'd lost her father.
The traumas of home life were compensated for at boarding school. Not particularly academic, Diana later recalled her time spent away from home.
My years at Westheath were certainly very happy ones indeed. I made many friends who I often see, and in spite of what Miss Rudge and my other teachers may have thought at the time, I did actually learn something. Though you would never have known by my O-level results.
For the young Diana, marriage and babies were an aristocratic girl's career. After Westheath, her future took a predictable turn, working as an unqualified nursery school teacher.
I wanted to teach children, and they said, why not come along? So I first started off doing afternoons, and then I took over the mornings and did whole days. But I only worked 3 days a week at kindergarten, and the other 2 I looked after American baby boy.
In November 1980, Diana's name was linked to Prince Charles. The press soon picked up the scent. Her caution in front of the cameras was a skill she swiftly acquired when quizzed about her relationship with Charles.
Can you say if you're likely to hear an announcement soon?
If you love history, then you'll love History Hit. Our extensive library of documentary features everything from the ancient origins of our earliest ancestors to the daring mission to sink the Bismarck. History Hit has hundreds of exclusive documentaries with unrivaled access to the world's best historians. We're committed to bringing history fans award-winning documentaries and podcasts that you cannot find anywhere else. Sign up now for a free trial, and Timeline fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code TIMELINE at checkout.
Lady Diana.
We thought it was going to be an announcement on his 32nd birthday, but there wasn't, and he told reporters yesterday that it may be coming soon. Was there any comment to make about that?
Lady Diana.
No comment all round. Did you have a good weekend though?
It's work now.
Okay.
An official announcement soon followed, and TV cameras were allowed momentarily to lift the veil of secrecy.
Can you take us back to when you first met?
Yes, certainly can. It was 1977. Charles came to stay as a friend of my sister Sarah's for a shoot. We sort of met in a ploughed field.
Slightly previous to that, but I know.
And what did you think then? What was your instant impression, both of you? What did you think about Lady Diana?
Well, I remember thinking what a very jolly and amusing and attractive 16-year-old she was. And, I mean, great fun. And bouncy and full of life and everything. And I don't know what you thought of me.
Pretty amazing.
Nobody worried about the 13-year age difference. So openly in love, the couple brought joy to a nation undergoing hard times. Shy Di was launched on the world. Her first public appearance caused a few raised eyebrows at a reception in London's Goldsmiths Hall.
She went to the Emanuels and chose a very daring dress, which was very low-cut, strapless. Rather a ball gown than an ordinary dress suitable for a concert. She was a very voluptuous girl in those days. This was long before the bulimia set in. And of course, when Prince Charles stepped out of his car with Diana behind him, he looked at the photographers and said, "You won't believe what's coming next." And they were all thrilled when they saw her because she made sensational pictures. And of course, she had to bend very low to get out of the car. And I know that there was a lot of questions asked in newsrooms and television studios later that evening about whether the pictures were fit for broadcast, because the dress was so low cut that a lot of people thought that we were going to see a bit too much of the next Princess of Wales. It was a very, very glamorous eyeful of a gorgeous girl.
Wedding worries were beginning to tell. At a polo match, Diana left the field in tears. Later, revelations claimed that Diana was having serious doubts about the marriage. Her unhappiness was caused by Charles's continuing friendship with an old girlfriend, Camilla Parker Bowles.
Charles was in love with Camilla years before he met Diana. That love then turned into a deep and close friendship. He didn't give up that friendship. It was at Camilla's house that he did most of his courting of Diana. Camilla was very much involved in his relationship with Diana in the early days. So there's no doubt that certainly he was seeing her during that period.
After the engagement announcement, Charles left on an official 5-week tour of Australia. Reports later suggested that he'd been with Camilla prior to his departure, reducing Diana to tears when she saw him off at the airport.
Well, you see, there was a great problem at the time because the Prince of Wales had had various girlfriends who, however nice they were deemed to be rather unsuitable and that they'd had previous boyfriends and so on. And to my mind, the two grannies got together, Lady Fermoy and the Queen Mother who doted on Charles, and they thought, here is the most wonderful, sweet girl who comes from the right sort of background and she would be ideal. I think the trouble was that they really had absolutely nothing in common. And he, having been the Prince of Wales, the dominant party and all the rest of it, found himself caught up with and then gradually overtaken by this complete superstar.
The wedding was the biggest media event the world had ever seen. Unbeknown, Diana's anxiety extended to her father's state of health.
I think it was a terrible ordeal for Diana, and I think it was a terrible ordeal for Lord Spencer as well, but he had a very, very bad stroke from which it was thought he wouldn't recover. She virtually had to carry him up the aisle. And to add to all her problems, this magnificent wedding dress, designed by the Emanuels, had got fantastically crushed in the carriage, which was a problem that nobody had anticipated. And, I mean, everybody was rushing round in panic because this dress was completely crumpled like a piece of tissue paper. It looked as if it had never been ironed. And that must have been really, well, horrid for her in a way on this very, very special day with all these other pressures. But I think she overcame it.
Diana made a radiant and confident figure in her stunning wedding gown. She endeared herself to the world when she muddled her husband's names as she took her vows.
I, Diana Francis.
I, Diana Francis.
Take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George.
Take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George.
To my wedded husband.
To my wedded husband.
To have and to hold.
To have and to hold.
From this day forward.
From this day forward.
For better, for worse.
For better, for worse.
For richer, for poorer.
For richer, for poorer.
In sickness and in health.
In sickness and in health.
To love and to cherish.
To love and to cherish.
Till death us do part.
Till death us do part.
Diana and Charles left for their honeymoon. Britain spent the day celebrating. First stop Gibraltar in a plane with Prince Charles at the controls, en route for a trip around the Mediterranean aboard the Royal Yacht Britannia. But the strain of the past few months had taken a toll on Diana. The run-up to the wedding had been a traumatic experience for the new Princess of Wales. Observers noticed how thin and tired she looked.
When she arrived at the airport at Gibraltar, she was so sort of pale and she was so thin. She looked so fragile and nervous. She was like a bag of nerves, you know, as if the whole of the last few days she was really worn down with it. And all the time she was searching around, sort of following Charles in his footsteps, and she wasn't at all confident about it.
To be alone as ever they would be, that was the plan. But Charles's association with Camilla extended to the honeymoon. Later, reports suggested that he telephoned her from the royal yacht. Future trouble was still a long way off as the couple returned to Balmoral with loving smiles and shining eyes. The fairy tale continued.
And as they walked down through the heather, they were hand in hand, they were giggling, and there was a lot of body language amongst the two of them. And he kept kissing her hand, and she kept going all pink and giggly, and it was really very natural. It wasn't at all staged. At that stage, it was a very spontaneous, natural sort of thing between the two of them. And it was a very pretty scene as they came down. And then they disappeared off into not the sunset, but the heather, hand in hand, and it was a romantic shot as they disappeared.
The romantic scenes from Balmoral soon gave way to concern about Diana's health. Behind the smiles, there were other muttered concerns.
Diana was very unstable emotionally, as we now know in hindsight, when she married Prince Charles. And I think Prince Charles really, really wanted to play Professor Higgins, and he really wanted to help her. I mean, on their honeymoon, she was deeply distraught, very unhappy, so much so, he actually got a psychiatrist to go up to Balmoral. This is you know, like 4 weeks into their honeymoon. Now, that's not the action of someone that doesn't care. It's someone that's desperately thinking, you know, I've got to help this girl.
members of her mother's family have told me that her own mother was a very, very highly strung woman. Indeed, somebody once described her as a hysteric. Now, Diana is certainly not that. She's got the hard-headedness of the Spencers, but she's undoubtedly extremely nervy. And the sort of pressures that were put upon her, and although Prince Charles did his best to support her, he wasn't the sort of cuddly daddy that she missed, and I think she missed that sort of reassurance, and therefore I think that she was unhappy and lonely and depressed, and she was terribly isolated in her ivory tower.
Diana's problems were temporarily overcome with the euphoria of motherhood. Within a year of marriage, Prince William was born. When a month-long official foreign tour was planned, Diana insisted that the baby William accompany them to Australia and New Zealand. Public interest in the young couple was intense.
Does Prince William have a favourite toy?
Jamie, he loves his koala bear he's got. But he hasn't got anything particular. He just likes something with a bit of noise.
It's a plastic whale which throws things out the top.
He got a plastic whale that throws things out the top, little balls.
Thank you. Jamie, I hope that answers your question.
Charles was pleased to show off his dancing prowess before his Australian hosts. Exhausted by the royal itinerary and the relentless heat, Diana and Charles were mobbed by crowds wherever they appeared.
There were crowds everywhere who wanted to shake hands with her. And in one city, Brisbane in Queensland, the crowds closed in on her. They were almost 1 million people turned out to see her. And it was just so frightening. She had to retire to the town hall and have a glass of water, and she was at a state of collapse, I think. It was very hot. Too many people were crowding into a very small street, and the police were afraid that there'd be a major incident.
It must have been a terrifying experience for somebody who was so unused to such things. I mean, it was quite frightening enough for the rest of us who'd done it many times before.
Diana claimed that her first foreign trip had been a baptism of fire. The visit had been a remarkable success. Charles was proud of his new wife.
Ladies and gentlemen, the last time I was here was 2 years ago, in 1981, shortly before we were married. And at that time, everybody was saying, good luck, and I hope everything goes well, and how lucky you are to be engaged to such a lovely lady. And my goodness, I was lucky enough to marry her. And we had many, many messages. It's amazing what ladies do when your back's turned.
I do think he was very proud of her in the early days. And I think that really noticed in Australia in '83. I mean, the way he sort of put his arm around her and pushed her forward to meet people, and he did look very proud of her. And he used to catch a glimpse now and again when they were sitting on a podium, and he would turn around and look at her, and there would be just a little sort of exchange between the two, and I think he was very proud of her.
But things began to turn sour. On an official visit to Canada later in the year, Diana was quoted as saying, "One minute I was a nobody, the next minute I was the Princess of Wales, mother, media toy, member of this family. It was just too much for one person to handle." Charles seemed incapable of comprehending the turmoil in Diana's life. She was suffering from the eating disorder bulimia nervosa and existing on chocolate bars to keep her going.
I think everybody noticed that she was Belson-like. I mean, she was pathetically thin. And, I mean, I was always quite close to the royal party at state banquets and so on. And you just see her pushing her food around her plate. I mean, I never, ever saw her eat anything. And at that time, we thought that she was just trying very hard to sort of please her hosts, that it was nerves, really, that was preventing her from eating properly. But, I mean, everybody was aware that she was far too thin. There were anxieties about her.
At one point, Diana fainted and had to be helped away. Charles is reported to have been unsympathetic, and after recovering her composure, they left quickly.
Some of the people very close to her then told me later that they thought that she staged that faint because she was extremely hot, tired, and very bored with staggering round one boring exhibition after another with her husband. And as a way of escape, she just collapsed very neatly out of the view of the television and the still cameraman. So it was a very well-timed collapse.
Back on form, Diana gave the Canadian people an amusing glimpse of royal life on a collision course with Charles. 6 months pregnant with her second child, Diana seemed the perfect example of wifehood and motherhood, hardly a hint of personal unhappiness. Later reports claimed that Charles was dismissive about the birth of Prince Harry, disappointed that their second child wasn't a girl and looking too much like a Spencer with a lot of red hair. Pictures of them together captured the fulfillment of married love. There were signs, though, that Charles was once again seeing Camilla Parker Bowles. Late-night telephone calls, unexplained absences. Ironically, their marriage appeared otherwise to be happy. On holiday in Spain with King Juan Carlos and his family, Diana and Charles appeared relaxed away from the spotlight and the pressures of royal duty. This was Diana's kind of holiday, and she much admired the King of Spain's attitude towards his royal duties.
Juan Carlos is quite informal, really, compared to our monarchy. When he buzzes around on a motorbike and journalists have drinks with him in bars, he sort of buys them a beer. It's very different, and I think Diana liked this. I mean, Charles may have found that informality a little difficult to deal with, but it was quite relaxing for Diana and the boys to be in that kind of atmosphere.
Diana's greatest test was the royal couple's first visit to the United States. Public interest was massive, and the trip included being guests of honor at a glittering White House ball. For Washington, it was the social event of the decade. The cream of American arts and public life turned out to meet Diana, who was welcomed by President Reagan.
Your Royal Highnesses, Sir Oliver and Lady Wright, and Ambassador and Mrs. Price, and ladies and gentlemen, Nancy and I are deeply honored to welcome the Prince and Princess of Wales to the White House. Permit me to add our congratulations.
The president was so taken with Diana's presence that he almost forgot her name.
And express also our great happiness that we have been able to have this affair with Princess Diane here on her first trip to the United States that we should be able to share in that first trip.
Later, Diana danced with John Travolta, leaving her husband to explain what the experience had been like.
Well, I'm not a glove puppet, so I can't answer for that, I'm afraid. But I think you enjoyed it, didn't you, Ronnie? Be an idiot if she didn't enjoy dancing with John Travolta, wouldn't she?
And why were the press so fascinated by their every move?
It's nothing to do with me, it's my wife here.
During a visit to the Treasure Houses of Britain exhibition, Charles's disapproving tone went unnoticed by their American hosts, although they did notice that Diana seemed distracted and unwell. She was exhausted, she hadn't eaten and was distressed by her husband's uncaring attitude towards her bulimia nervosa.
I'm not sure that many people really understand bulimia, and I think that it is particularly difficult for the people who have to live with those people who suffer from it. I think Charles found it a very difficult thing. I mean, her moods were up and down. One minute she was pleased with life and optimistic and happy, and the next minute hurling things about the place. The problem is that if you live with somebody who day after day is like this, who's constantly eating and then disappearing to the loo to chuck up, I just know that it must be very difficult to be understanding and patient and reassuring and always there with the compassion that is needed day after day after day.
I'm told by psychiatrists that it's very difficult for husbands to understand when a woman's bulimic because they're simply repulsed by it. The smell, the mess, it's frightful. Nobody can understand why somebody would wish to do this to themselves. And so he was very turned off by it. He was physically turned off by it, and I think that was the main reason why they stopped sleeping together.
Bulimia has its roots in an unhappy childhood, self-doubt and uncertainty in adolescence. Years later, Diana was able to speak on behalf of fellow bulimia sufferers.
The illness they developed became their shameful friend. By focusing their energies on controlling their bodies, they had found a refuge from having to face the more painful issues at the center of their lives. A way of coping, albeit destructively and pointlessly, but a way of coping with a situation they were finding unbearable.
In 1986, Dai mania took Japan by the throat when the royal couple visited the country in May. Its teeming population had watched the royal wedding on television and was now in the grip of a quite extraordinary enthusiasm. But the Japanese were blissfully unaware of Diana's difficulties.
I think to the Japanese, she looked like the sort of European goddess of folklore, because she was beautifully tall, beautifully blonde, beautifully dressed. She was their absolute ideal European beauty. And the way she behaved and her gentleness and so on, I think would also have appealed to them a great deal. And she was an absolute wow. You know, the inscrutable Oriental cracked, and they absolutely adored her. And I remember going to Buddhist temples with her, and the monks were all sort of falling over themselves, taking photographs. I mean, anything less dignified, you know, chattering away. There was meant to be vows of silence. But even they couldn't resist saying, she's gorgeous.
Diana brought a movie star glamour to the role of Princess of Wales. Using clothes to express her personality and boost her self-confidence, Diana enjoyed dressing for the part.
She did two things in Japan. One, she wore a dress, a white silk dress with big red circles, and it looked just like the rising sun on the Japanese flag. And then the second thing she did later in the week is she wore a dress designed by a Japanese designer. And up until that time, we'd only seen her in British design clothes. So it was her way of complimenting them.
There's no doubt that Diana put British fashion on the map. I mean, certainly the designers who dressed her, Belleville Sassoon, Victor Edelstein, Catherine Walker, they were really made by her patronage, and people all around the world started buying their clothes. And of course the Emanuels who designed her wedding dress were instantly transformed into sensational designers.
Between them, on joint tours around the world, they created a climate of goodwill towards Britain, whose brighter and better future they seemed to represent. Diana was role model, a heroine. In Venice and elsewhere, she was a superstar who became the most powerful image in a popular world culture. Like every other celebrity, she fed and lived on her public's emotions. She wore their affection like a suit of armor. She used it to defend herself against Charles's uncaring attitude towards her and to win the hearts of her adoring public. He was reduced to a second-class royal citizen.
Such was the adulation. I mean, it was clear to see that nobody was remotely interested in him. You know, I mean, he was just the bouquet carrier, you know. They'd walk down on a walkabout and, you know, they'd all sort of look over his shoulder while he was trying to talk to them, to try and see if she was going to cross over and come down their side. You know, they didn't want him at all, you know. And he'd say, hello, how are you? And they'd say, could you give this bouquet to Diana, please? You know, poor man. I mean, it was very humiliating for him, you know. And there were great boos when he came over to their side of the street because they wanted Diana, but she couldn't split herself in two. Indeed, she made this comment, you know. She said she was sorry to disappoint, but she couldn't be both sides of the road at the same time.
It was a magic but dangerous quality that set Diana apart from most other royal performers, but she was different from them in another way. Her vulnerability made her easy for the emotionally wounded to identify with, a quality which Charles didn't possess.
Diana was aware how much her husband resented her popularity and that the fact that she upstaged him. And so she was doing her best to prevent the problem. But in the end, she saw that it was useless and she just gave up.
Public adoration was actually the thing that kept Diana going. She lived for it. It was like a drug for her. She was overwhelmed by it when she first came to it, when she first became engaged to Charles. She initially found it very difficult to cope with, but once she'd got on top of it, she actually found that it was tremendous.
Her marriage made her a beauty and a star. Maybe it was because she was so young and naive that she took part in the fairy tale wedding that everybody hoped and believed would be a success. A framed picture of the prince hung in her dormitory at school. Her destiny was to marry Prince Charles, but not to stay in the Victorian era. Her proud father, Earl Spencer, recalled that one of her great strengths had been to cope with her public exposure.
She's very good-natured, and it doesn't worry her. Publicity doesn't worry her. As you've seen from the way she's dealt with the press, she's taken it all in her stride. I think she'll always be like that. She's very practical, Diana, very down-to-earth. Very practical, very good housewife. And incidentally, when she was a baby, she was a superb physical specimen. She'd won any baby prize there was going.
The Spencer family, as I've said, were one of the oldest families in Britain. They were all very distinguished. They all rose to the very top. While a lot of people were speculating was Lady Diana Spencer a suitable match for the Prince of Wales, he advanced the thought, was he a suitable match for her, given that you know, the Windsor family haven't been in this country quite as long as the Spencers.
Long summer holidays in Scotland showed the royal family in a new light. Diana became more guarded and less confident in her dealings with them. In public, the couple put on a happy face as rumours about their private life grew gloomier. Images of happier, more promising days will live on in the nation's family album. On the darker side, she had very little in common with the royal family.
I think the poor Princess of Wales had a very difficult time in that the Duke of Edinburgh and the Princess Royal don't tolerate people they consider fools. And they are very sort of hard-headed and down-to-earth and so on. And I think they considered her a little bit of a lightweight, a little bit of a featherhead. The Queen, I think, was absolutely thrilled with her because I think she fulfilled exactly what she wanted in that she was a nice girl, the public loved her, and she'd produced 2 sons and heirs for the Prince of Wales, and I'm sure the Queen felt that, you know, she would make him happy.
Charles preferred the solitude of the Scottish countryside and painting.
She's a very urban creature, although she was brought up in the country. She loves society, loves pavements and shops and restaurants and being on the end of a telephone or meeting her friends. So their life really was a million miles away from hers.
Diana and Charles were spending more and more time apart. As an unhappy royal wife of an unhappy royal husband, it was their decision to separate their lives and appear together only in public and on family occasions. The press got wind of their estrangement and in 1987 published stories questioning the myth that the Wales' marriage was a happy one. But the fabrication didn't stop there. Palace officials reassured the newspapers and the world that the stories were untrue. The family home at Highgrove in Gloucestershire was not surrounded by pressmen, nor was the nearby home of Charles's close friend Camilla Parker Bowles, to whom Charles fled when the pressure got too great.
I think if you've got a very unhappy relationship, you always find somebody else's shoulder to cry on. It could be somebody of the same sex. There was probably no one to talk to, so he's going to lean on the shoulder of a friend, and that friend happened to be a woman, and I think probably Camilla probably saved Charles's sanity. I think we should be grateful to her.
It all began to go wrong after the birth of Prince Harry. Perhaps she was like any young wife. She'd had a young family very quickly. They hadn't had time to get to know each other after their wedding before she became pregnant. It was too much. Diana was exposed to too much stress in too short a time. It was too much to cope with, being transformed from a nobody into a worldwide sensation overnight. And she got engaged, married, pregnant, all within 9 months. It was just too much for any woman.
There seemed no way out for Diana. Sucked into the myth and magic of the monarchy, the lie had to be maintained. Although the marriage was a sham, it must not appear that way to the outside world. Diana spent holidays alone with her children and her mother and sisters, and attended her son's school sports day. She extended her public role, she supported the family unit, and spoke on the subject of family values at a controversial conference in Brighton.
I doubt whether there is any standard formula for a successful family. The family is, after all, the most human, and hence the most imperfect, of institutions. Instead, I could only point to those mothers, fathers, and children in lonely isolation or in comfortable conformity who simply do their best with what they have.
Charles broke his arm playing polo, and Diana appeared publicly by his side when he left hospital.
How are you, sir?
But as soon as the press was out of sight, they parted, and Charles returned to his home at Highgrove and close to Camilla, his surrogate mother.
Well, a lot of people that know Charles quite well say that Camilla played that role. She played the role of sort of mother nanny. Prince Charles had a nanny every moment of the day who loved him very, very much. And some research proves that as long as you have one adult figure that is always there and loves you very much, it doesn't really matter if it's your mother, your father, or a nanny.
On an official visit to the Taj Mahal in India, Diana sat alone in front of the temple dedicated to eternal love. Charles came here before his marriage to Diana and sat in the same spot. He then vowed to return with his wife. In Egypt, Diana was again alone while Charles was on a private trip to Turkey. Diana, the royal ambassador at large, was flying the flag for Britain. In Pakistan, she reached a new level of self-confidence.
She was beautiful. Now, with the best will in the world, the royal family are not beautiful. She was distinctly beautiful. She also brought great style. The royal family have never been renowned for being the best-dressed women in Britain, have they? They have other priorities. So she brought the glamour to the royal family that they'd lacked for a very long time. The Queen always commanded affection, but she was never perceived as gorgeous. And that's what Diana brought. She brought the glamour, the mystery of majesty, that elusive thing. She was the fairy tale princess.
In April 1992, Diana's beloved father died unexpectedly. A grieving Princess of Wales with other members of her family were joined by Charles in an emotional funeral service. A simple bouquet of lilies and sweet peas summed up Diana's grief over the loss of her beloved father. Within months, Andrew Morton's book appeared. The whole sham of the royal marriage was out in the open. The press had a field day as the revelations confirmed Diana's bulimia and her unhappy marriage to Charles. Camilla was exposed as Charles's mistress of many years, and Diana's own friend James Gilby and many others were credited as having spilled the beans to Andrew Morton. On top of this, bugged telephone conversations were leaked to the press. The strain was too much for Diana.
In all that you do, you reflect so very sincerely the philosophy of tender, loving care, which is and always will be the hallmark of this hospice.
At a hospice in Liverpool, the chairman's words reduced her to tears.
Her nerves were stretched to breaking point when she went up to Liverpool. I mean, she was bulimic. And it all just, I mean, her marriage had broken up, the Andrew Morton book had come out, everyone knew every detail of her private life. She was completely stressed out. I mean, I think we were very lucky that she didn't end up in a hospital, quite honestly. And I think, of course, when someone shows you a little bit of kindness and you're at breaking point, it's very, very normal to break down into tears.
Recovering her composure, Diana appeared with Charles at the Royal Garter ceremony. The public revelations about her marriage had left their mark, and Diana was suspected in royal circles of cooperating with Andrew Morton as an act of desperation.
I think Diana felt there was no other way to tell the world about her tragic personal life. She felt that only public exposure could end her private ordeal. And she was right, because it certainly achieved that aim, but perhaps the way she did it wasn't the wisest way. It was certainly damaging to her children, and it certainly made the royal family regard her as a traitor in their midst. And from that day on, I think her fate was sealed.
Before the revelations, plans had been made for Charles and Diana to make an official visit to Korea. Diana agreed with the Queen to accompany her estranged husband. The press hailed it as an opportunity for them to show some reconciliation. In the event, the body language said it all.
There was a hideous moment when we walked into the Prime Minister's residence, and the Prime Minister made a wonderful speech saying, "You are a beautiful couple and we are all delighted to welcome you." Well, it was just so obvious that those words were exactly the wrong thing to say. It was a classic textbook case of a warring couple. They didn't speak to each other once in our presence. They didn't even look at each other if they could avoid it. I mean, I can't remember seeing them look at each other.
Back in London, Diana and Charles attended the Royal Variety performance together. This was the last time they were seen in public before Prime Minister John Major made an announcement to the House of Commons.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected. This decision has been reached amicably, and they will both continue to participate fully in the upbringing of their children.
The strain of being thought to be living happily in a glorious land of tiaras and titles and happy endings was in fact too much to bear for Diana. She had fought for an independent life as a career princess and exposed the fairy tale as fiction.
I think had the two of them paid more attention to each other and taken more care of each other and the situation, I think Diana could have been a good wife for him. What I think happened and where it went so wrong was because she was so young, her head was turned by the stardom, and she had great difficulty in coping with that. He, meanwhile, had great difficulty in coping with a nose that was put very badly out of joint by having the limelight stolen from him.
Using the limelight, Diana made a speech about eating disorders.
I'm supposed to have my head down the loo for most of the day.
It was clear that she had completely recovered from her bulimia, free at last from her shameful friend.
I'm supposed to be dragged off in a minute with men in white coats, so if it's all right with you, I thought I might postpone my nervous breakdown to a more appropriate moment.
He was turned off physically by Diana, but he was also tired of somebody who made so many demands on him. He was a very selfish man who led a life where he did exactly as he pleased. When a wife and children came along, he wasn't willing to make the sacrifices, give them the attention that they deserved. And that rankled with Diana, and she was constantly reminding him of that.
It is a remarkable feat for a young woman to graduate from unqualified nursery teacher into a unique player on the world stage. She believed her husband had rejected her love. Refusing to suffer in silence, she broke with royal tradition and fought back. She tried but failed to modernize the monarchy.
She brought a magic that they lacked. There was no young, glamorous woman in their ranks when Diana came along. They desperately needed her, and they didn't know it at the time. The world took to her immediately, with her freshness, her naivety, her wonderful figure, long, lovely legs, blonde, good looks, blue eyes, and a willingness to enjoy all that part of the role. In fact, we wanted her so much that we willed Charles to marry her. And the rest, as they say, is history. He went along with it. We all thought she was so perfect. I think the stories at the time that we wrote said that she had all the qualities for a queen, and she did. She was just ideal for the role, but she wasn't ideal for Charles, and that was the tragedy.
Her marriage made her a beauty and a heroine. In a revolutionary move, she changed from victim to star. She is still the mother of the heir to the throne. Her influence over Prince William will take the monarchy into the next century. She'll continue to support her charitable causes and play an important role in the lives of ordinary people. Like many women of her time, she's discovered that her career has given her the confidence to act more decisively in her own private life.
For the crime of committing adultery with the heir to the throne, Mrs. Camilla Parker Bowles, a 49-year-old housewife, has been handed down an exemplary sentence. For the past 5 years, she has barely been able to set foot outside her door.
She has been under house arrest, effectively, for quite some time. She's just coming out of it. She'll go to parties given by good friends. But even so, it's still a business, and they have to go in back doors and keep watch out for the paparazzi and run the gauntlet as she did outside the Ritz a year or so ago.
October the 10th, 1995, and the attentions of the gentlemen of the press are as rough and ready as ever. An early attempt by the loving couple to be seen together in public ends in chaos. The prince leaves the party separately, not yet ready to be photographed with the woman he loves.
If he wants her badly enough, he will come out and either say, this is the woman I intend to marry, and I hope you will all be understanding, or he will say, this is the woman I shall be spending a lot more time with, and therefore you better get used to the idea.
The problem for Charles is that the population is still in love with Princess Diana. It doesn't think so much of Camilla.
I have known Camilla for 20, 30 years, and I've always found her extremely attractive. She's got a terrific sense of humour. She's very funny, and she's also very sexy. But best of all, she's wonderful company, and she has been really cruelly treated.
She has had to suffer huge humiliation. In fact, indeed, when she went shopping at a supermarket once, some of the women who had also been buying their food there pelted her with bread rolls.
For a quarter of a century, Camilla Parker Bowles has enjoyed the devotion of the Prince of Wales. Their relationship, according to the Prince, was in 3 parts, but did not contribute to the breakdown of his marriage. The world knows all about Diana, but what have they learned about Camilla?
The interesting thing about Camilla Parker Bowles is nobody knows her. And there's this great sort of fascination and mystique about her still, because nobody's even heard her speak.
Until now. The Parker Bowles motto has been, stay out of sight and keep your trap shut. But here, in this amateur video from a recent charity event, the real Camilla can be seen and heard for the first time.
Just a very brief word to say how grateful I am to you, especially the artists, for coming here tonight and supporting so generously such a deserving cause. It is particularly poignant to me and my family, as my mother died last year as a result of this terrible disease. Having witnessed the misery and the pain it causes, I felt I had to try and do something to help others suffering such distress. So I hope the money raised this evening will go a little way towards funding research in this very worthwhile cause. Thank you again for coming. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Have a safe journey home. Good night.
What has brought Camilla out of the shadows is her newly acquired role as patron of the National Osteoporosis Society. She cuts an unlikely figure amongst the media-friendly faces recruited to boost the charity's profile, but she's a willing helper.
I asked her last year if she would become a patron of the society to formalise her role, because she'd been working with us for 2 years previous to that, since her mother died, in fact, of osteoporosis. And she saw her mother die of this dreadful disease. She knows how severe it is, how painful it is.
This higher profile is against all her instincts. Can she overcome her legendary reticence and become a persuasive figure?
She certainly has the ability to communicate well on an individual level and among a small group.
Her great-grandmother, Alice Keppel, started the 20th century as Camilla ends it in the arms of a prince. She was King Edward VII's mistress.
She was a very vivacious, very attractive, very charming woman, very sensuous kind of woman. There was Italian blood in her family. And so in a way she caught his eye, and he never really looked back. He was very taken with her. She was the perfect king's mistress. King Edward VII was a very restless, very difficult man. She knew exactly how to handle him. So she was, as I say, the perfect mistress for a king, for a man like him.
Edward, like Charles, first spotted his future mistress at an equestrian event. Their relationship, noted a courtier, warmed up like a bonfire.
In those days, there was no scandal about that kind of thing. The general public didn't know about it at all. If photographs of them appeared in British newspapers, then her face would be airbrushed out. You would see her hat, you would see her dress, but you wouldn't actually see who it was. In that way, the newspapers were very discreet about it.
Historians believe that Mrs. Keppel's second daughter, Sonia, was the king's child, making Camilla his great-granddaughter.
There were two daughters. There was Violet and there was Sonia. And as the second daughter, Sonia, was born after Alice Keppel had met the then Prince of Wales, it's quite likely that he was her father. No one can know this kind of thing for sure. But I think it is more than likely that the future King Edward VII was Sonia Keppel's father.
The ghost of Alice Keppel watched over a new generation of royal lovers, for in the year she died, Camilla was born. Her grandfather's name was Cubitt. His family of builders were raised to the peerage for having built London's most fashionable district, Belgravia. But it is from her father, Bruce Shand, that much of Camilla's doughty and complex character is inherited. The Shands weren't aristocrats, but wealthy merchants. From them came a son who helped create the Labour Party, and who was jilted by a fiancé who preferred to marry Oscar Wilde. Camilla's Shand grandfather counted amongst his friends the 20th century's greatest architects. Those Shands married often and took particular pleasure in their many encounters with the opposite sex. Camilla Rosemary Shand was born at King's College Hospital, London, on July the 17th, 1947, and grew up in the country.
She was very pretty, very sort of, always very nicely turned out, and always seemed to be in a position of control somehow. She was not quite organising events, but she was definitely the centre of attraction.
16 months younger than Camilla, Prince Charles's birth in November 1948 assured the continuation of a dynasty still haunted by the abdication only 12 years before of King Edward VIII. At the coronation 5 years later, courtiers convinced themselves that the child of so reliable a monarch as Queen Elizabeth would never risk the throne merely for the love of a woman. On the balcony that day, a young page boy called Andrew Parker Bowles. Sussex in coronation year, where Camilla's family celebrated the dawn of a new Elizabethan age. Bruce and Rosalind Shand had made their home here at the Lanes, a former rectory at Plumpton near Lewes, where they brought up Camilla with her brother Mark and sister Annabel. Horses were an integral part of daily life.
Bruce Shand, her father, was joint master of the Southdown Hunt at the time, and so if you're the daughter of the local MFH, I think you're bound to be thrown into it. But I mean, you know, I think she just loved it.
At 10, Camilla was sent to Queensgate School, a short walk from the other family home in London's Kensington. Ever sporty, she excelled at fencing and, of course, riding. As she matured, she became, if not a beauty, then extremely appealing to the opposite sex.
She was an enormously attractive girl, very popular, quite snooty and quite sort of difficult to get to know. Twin set, pearls, tweed skirt, that sort of thing.
Did she have sex appeal?
Yes, great sex appeal. I mean, as far as I can see, as a female, I would say so, yes. She could have got any boy she wanted to. Strangely enough, when I read at the very beginning that Charles was seeing somebody called Camilla, instantly I read that, I thought, I bet that's Miller. I bet that's Camilla. I wasn't the slightest bit surprised when I found out it was. I almost knew it would be. She was perfect for him.
Few Queensgate girls were destined for university. The school turned out well-bred conformists, but Camilla wasn't one of them.
My ex-wife was at school, shared a room with her actually at Queensgate, and smoking in those days was considered pretty naughty. I mean, I think it was you could either be sent down or gated, or have to spend some long moments at home contemplating your fate if you were caught smoking. And she certainly apparently used to go out on the roof and smoke, and my wife was far too frightened to do that.
It was quite a strict school. I mean, once you got in, you didn't get out. There was somebody on the door, and so you couldn't escape once you were in there. Quite strict, very Victorian, full of Sloaney type girls, I would say. The majority of them wore headscarves, darling. A lot of twin sets around. Queensgate girls were only really taught how to write out cheques. Do you know, I think actually we did have a lesson in that, on how to write out a cheque.
The hermetically sealed society Camilla was destined for, where no outsiders intruded, encouraged its members to find spouses from its own ranks.
We were, I guess, all prepared to meet the right man, to go to the right parties, to do the debutante scene, and eventually marry somebody that could keep you in luxury, to which you had been accustomed to living with Mummy and Daddy. We were certainly discouraged to meet anyone from any other sphere, both by school and our parents. So it was a very small circle, really, of boys from all the top public schools.
Freed from formal education and with no need to find a career, Camilla Shand found her amusement at the polo field. In the early 70s, still a relic of empire, polo at Smith's Lawn in the shadow of Windsor Castle was an enclosed world for tough guys and beautiful girls.
Today they talk about chucker charlottes, whereby girls go there to pick up their future husband. And there was always something nice to drink and the weather would be decent, and it's not like sort of standing on a freezing grouse moor. Polo's always been the great summer game, and all the young Guards officers who'd be stationed at Windsor would naturally play at Guards.
One such was Andrew Parker Bowles, a handsome cavalry officer whose skills far outshone those of the newly arrived Prince of Wales. Among the prettiest girls at Smith's Lawn, Jane Ward was one of the chucker charlottes to catch the Prince's eye.
I don't think we were in a category when I was sort of doing it, except for that, you know, it's the summer, so you're always brown, and it's the sort of the predominance of blonde, or long floating blonde. We hadn't got into the Gucci sunglasses, but we were perhaps in the designer. We were going that way. The women weren't, you know, if they weren't South American, they were well-travelled, you know, Hillary Westons and, you know, Kate Vesties in those days and things like that. And so they were always, so there was a lot of health and, you know, vibrancy, I suppose. It was the era of Prince Charles. His father had stopped playing and Prince Charles had sort of taken over. I mean, he was quite a loner when he was there. I mean, it was difficult for him to be sort of mixed with all of us. I mean, he couldn't sort of just rush around and be because he's the Prince of Wales.
In the hot summers of the early 70s, Smith's lawn began to sizzle with sexual tension.
He was a very attractive single man, driving his Aston Martin, crashing around, you know, falling off, jumping back on. I mean, he was just part of the team, really.
Still in his early 20s, Charles was making slow headway in forging relationships with the opposite sex, often preferring friendship to passion.
We were just good mates, good, you know. I mean, perhaps because I didn't stand on ceremony, so... And in those days, you know, it was quite rare for him to have someone who spoke their mind.
While Charles's friendship with Jane Ward was light and uncommitted, Camilla's relationship with Andrew Parker Bowles was far more serious. But a chance encounter in 1971 finally brought the two lovers together. For Charles and Camilla, none of the starchy formality which surrounded the meeting between their famous ancestors. The atmosphere at Smith's Lawn was pleasantly laid back.
I think that everybody was aware there was a very strong friendship between the two of them. You know, they'd be talking and chatting and fooling around, you know, as one did. I mean, I think that body language is a strange... body language perhaps gives more away than anything else. And there was definitely a feeling of ease and comfort between the two of them, which and that sort of familiarity, which isn't over-familiar, which means that, you know, you get on well and you know each other well.
It was Camilla who made the first move. She teased Charles, "My great-grandmother and your great-great-grandfather were lovers, so how about it?" It was a challenge the prince found irresistible. Berkeley Square in late October. 25 years ago, into the exclusive basement club called Annabelle's, walked Prince Charles, his sister Princess Anne, and two lesser-known figures, landowner Gerald Ward and a blonde girl about town, Camilla Shand. The relationship had moved from Polo Field to the watering holes of Mayfair. And from Mayfair, it progressed to Camilla's flat in Stack House, Cundy Street, where finally the couple expressed, if not their love, then their passion for each other. But fate was against a love match. Charles's naval duties beckoned him abroad, and in any event, Camilla had committed herself to Andrew Parker Bowles. But the attraction remained.
In the case of Prince Charles, and here I only surmise, he apparently thought he was too young, which is a perfectly normal reaction to get married at that time. And in her case, she still had the shadow of Andrew Parker Bowles looming large over her, and it was large. She adored Andrew, and Andrew, as he would, was playing fairly hard to get, and he's a very attractive man, I believe. I think she probably just found him too much of an influence.
The prince prepared himself for the Navy and lonely exile, while Camilla wrote out her wedding invitations.
Duke of Edinburgh was determined that he should have a naval career and go off and do this and that and the other, so he had to get on and do those things before he could contemplate getting married. Now, if you meet the love of your life at the wrong time, a bit difficult, isn't it?
After an on-off relationship that had lasted 7 years, Camilla Shand finally married her cavalry officer in July 1973. The guests included Princess Anne, Andrew Parker Bowles' former girlfriend. Blessed with money as well as breeding, the newlyweds set up home at Bowleyhyde Manor in Wiltshire. Within a year, Camilla gave birth to a son, Thomas. By the mid-70s, Charles's naval career brought him home and to Hall Place, the Hampshire home of Camilla's grandmother, Sonia, daughter of King Edward VII. What had been a youthful fling was now rekindled as an extramarital affair.
Well, they always had been very, very good friends, and to me there's nothing remotely strange about good friends remaining or re-becoming good friends again. And the more you see of someone, if you like them and you have a lot in common, which they do, the more you may well like them. So it filled a void in Camilla's life. I mean, Andrew was rushing around a lot, and it's quite possible to have a lover-stroke-husband and a very close friend of the other sex. It's happened to all of us. I hope it's happened to you. It's very simple.
Sooner or later, Andrew Parker Bowles, pursuing his own army career, became aware of the rekindled relationship. But with customary good grace, he continued to make Charles welcome at Bowleyhyde Manor, as Jane Ward remembers.
Andrew would say occasionally that he had to sort of be back in time to have dinner because the Prince of Wales was coming, and so I knew that they were good friends.
Within the tight-knit circle of polo followers, the relationship had become common knowledge. At the Cirencester Polo Club ball, Charles and Camilla danced, perhaps a little too enthusiastically, with one another.
Personally, it was only different in the fact that I, for the first time, was aware that they spent quite a lot of the evening dancing. And maybe, you know, I was quite conscious of that for the first time.
As the evening wore on, partygoers became acutely aware that Charles and Camilla, who monopolised the dance floor, were not only dancing, but kissing quite openly. Andrew Parker Bowles was there too.
Yes, he was.
And didn't seem to mind.
Didn't seem to mind.
And did the people who were there must have been 200 or 300 people, would they have remarked on that, or would they have all looked into their glasses or looked the other way?
Well, it certainly wasn't brought up.
Nobody would talk about it?
No, not at all, no.
Was there any talk at that stage for the relationship being different from what one supposed, which was, you know, a married couple and a single man?
We did all sort of think he's very long-suffering, you know. I mean, it was a very close threesome, but it was a little bit obvious, maybe, that...
That Andrew was long-suffering?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
With her husband's duties often taking him abroad, Camilla would find herself invited to formal events which Prince Charles also attended. Camilla Parker Bowles became known to other members of the House of Windsor, including the Queen, her married status causing few qualms to this worldly family. Though Charles returned to the polo field with Camilla in attendance, it wasn't easy for local reporters to spot the story.
Camilla was an ever-present at all the kind of various equestrian events that the Prince of Wales attended, and at that stage one could have been forgiven for thinking that the relationship was going to go somewhere. Even though she was married to Andrew Parker Bowles, there was a real kind of sexual chemistry between them even at that time. I used to speak to her on the phone probably once a week, probably for at least 10 years. Little did I know I was missing the greatest story in history, knowing that what was going on behind closed doors.
From Camilla's marriage to Charles's own engagement was a mere 7 years, yet the public became bemused by the number of pretty girls who graced the prince's arm. Each was heralded as a future bride, but many of these relationships remained platonic. For Charles's romantic life was fulfilled with Camilla. She, and from time to time their mutual friend Lady Tryon, Kanga, were his public escorts.
Those two ladies would be with him just to check, as they always did, that everything was perfect in Prince Charles's life, that his clothes were properly looked after, that people didn't come up and pester him, and they were constantly there. Two rather sophisticated dolly birds, just making sure that life was perfection for him. And I have to say they achieved it with a great deal of humour.
But the pressure was on for Prince Charles to find a bride. There had been too many purposeless relationships, and he was in danger of becoming a figure of fun in the tabloid press. Charles's guru, Lord Mountbatten, pushed for an alliance with his granddaughter, Amanda Knatchbull.
He was using Prince Charles as a sort of pawn to exercise his own ambition, and many people, a good deal closer to the royal family than I am, thought that it was too great, that influence.
But Mountbatten's murder in 1979 drove Charles almost to breaking point.
They are carried up to the heaven and down again to the deep.
He was shattered by the death of Lord Mountbatten, who had an enormous influence over him. And I'm quite sure, yes, that he sought the close friendship of Camilla, because she's very sensible.
In Gloucestershire, Highgrove House had come on the market. In the same year, Camilla encouraged the prince to buy it. Highgrove was a short 15-minute drive to the Parker Bowles home at Bowley Hyde Manor, just 10 miles away. Within a year came a crucial decision in the prince's life. A new companion had been found for him. A kindergarten school helper and the daughter of an earl, Lady Diana Spencer already knew much about the prince. Her sister Sarah had been his girlfriend. Prince Charles, under orders, had at last found a suitable candidate and was well pleased with his choice. Diana was paraded before the public to gauge their reaction. At a race meeting at Ludlow, Diana was chaperoned by a protective Camilla, 14 years her senior, as they watched Charles ride.
It was the first time I think the princess had been seen in public. She was wearing a very green, elegant country-style coat, and Camilla was wearing, as far as I can remember, something like a check country suit. And Camilla was very much the kind of intermediary, had her arm around the princess, explaining the kind of things that were going on. Diana, very, very nervous in those old days, clearly not the kind of sophisticated character she is now, and a bit of a different shape, and her hair was a different style, eyes kept looking down, very shy and very nervous in those days. And Camilla was a very caring role there, almost like a motherly role, if you like.
The interaction was mother and daughter. It was very much Camilla who was the woman in charge of the two, and I felt that Diana was treated almost like a child by Camilla. She was guided by Camilla, she listened to everything that Camilla said. At the time, it was easy to think, it's charming and it's sweet, isn't Camilla being wonderful? But I don't think that was really the case. I think it was Camilla was just making sure that Prince Charles was not going to step too far out of line as far as she, Camilla, was concerned. I think she was very much keeping an eye on a person whom she considered her personal property.
Camilla approved the match. By now, Prince Charles was 32, and she encouraged him to propose marriage to the 19-year-old Diana.
She certainly did encourage it, and I would say was very largely instrumental in the whole thing. I think she saw herself as doing everybody a good turn, and in some ways, in her position as an ongoing, very, very unusually close friend to Prince Charles, she probably saw it as a good chance of them all continuing as friends, particularly if she encouraged it. That's the logical conclusion that any of us might make.
Diana knew from the outset about Camilla, but she believed that with youth and beauty on her side, she could win Charles's affection.
Diana was a very naive 19-year-old girl who was absolutely besotted with Prince Charles. Now, when he spoke to her about his previous girlfriends, he said they were all married and they were all safe. That is to say, they were never going to spill the beans. So she believed him, and she also believed that him when he said that they were all consigned to the past. But during the courtship, she found all kinds of telltale signs of evidence that Charles was still enamoured with Camilla Parker Bowles.
On November the 16th, 1980, 3 months before the engagement was announced, the Sunday Mirror claimed that Diana had spent the night with Charles on the royal train. Security logs clearly showed that a woman had entered the train parked in a Wiltshire siding. Diana's protestations of innocence were undeniable, but the press didn't understand how the security services could have got it so wrong.
She did believe somebody had been on that train, and she knew it wasn't her, and she was very anxious that that should be put across. Maybe it was a shot across the brows to Prince Charles to say, you know, OK, somebody was on the train, but mate, it wasn't me. We know from telephone records that a call was made from the royal train into the Parker Bowles' home about an hour and a half before this lady appeared on the train and was smuggled on. It was seen by police, this woman going on board.
Camilla's friends say she has never seen the inside of the royal train. But when Prince Charles took off for a scheduled tour of Australia, Diana's public tears were thought to show how much she was missing the love of her life. Even on the announcement of their engagement, when it came to Charles being asked to publicly pledge his love for her, he was found wanting.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Yes.
I cannot believe that she didn't realise that there was a very, very close relationship, certainly a sexual one, between Prince Charles and Camilla. I don't think women miss things like that, and certainly not Lady Diana Spencer.
July 1981. 2 nights before the royal wedding, crowds gather in the Mall for the greatest royal showpiece since the coronation nearly 30 years before. In a room at Buckingham Palace, according to Charles's valet Stephen Barry, the Prince and Mrs. Parker Bowles made their farewells for the last time. In the morning sunshine, Charles prepares to stand and deliver the most public expression of devotion in history. 300 million people watch on television as the Queen and her family welcome into their midst the woman who will provide the House of Windsor with its next king. But all is not what it seems, for Diana's eyes are not on the altar, but looking among the congregation.
I remember Diana talking to her friends about the day that she got married and the moment that she walked down the aisle at St Paul's Cathedral. And she remembers seeing Camilla Parker Bowles standing there with her son Tom. She remembers that she was wearing a grey pillbox hat and a grey suit. And she thought to herself, I hope that that relationship is now consigned to history. She was really convulsed with two emotions. One was absolute adoration and love for Prince Charles, and the other, a hope that that relationship was over.
The Queen, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and others all knew the truth.
With this ring,
I thee wed.
I thee wed.
With my body,
With my body,
I thee honour.
I thee honour.
And all my worldly...
Later, Dr. Runcie was to describe it as an arranged marriage.
In the name of the Father...
The Church was getting a lot of credit from this. It was, if you like, a rather nostalgic glimpse of an image of England as a sort of Christian England, if you like. The Church of England performing its traditional role on a great national celebration and doing it enormously well and splendidly. I think it does put a question mark over the good faith, if you like, of the people who supported and arranged the marriage ceremony. If they had doubts about it, they certainly did not convey those doubts. Indeed, there was a rather dangerous invitation to the whole public to invest emotionally in the event, but with this qualification that there was obviously a fly in the ointment, and some in the church were aware of it and were prepared to take that risk. Well, I think now they are faced with the consequences of that risk.
Though this was a marriage built on shifting sands, each for their own reasons was prepared to make a go of it. They carried with them the goodwill of a trusting nation. Escorting the Prince and the Princess to their honeymoon was the ever-faithful, ever-promoted Andrew Parker Bowles. But even the best intentions can founder on something as trivial as a small photograph.
The time of the honeymoon was both a romantic time, but it was also a time of extreme bitterness and painful memories. There was one occasion on the Royal Yacht Britannia where she opened Charles's diaries and two pictures of Camilla fluttered to the floor.
Charles's biographer, Jonathan Dimbleby, described the Prince on his honeymoon like this. He seemed to go out of his way to avoid the moments of intimacy with her that she craved. But Diana's problems encouraged little intimacy. Bulimia, a reaction to the unprecedented strain she had undergone, became a concern. Soon after these pictures were taken at Balmoral, a psychiatrist was summoned from London. A chill had descended on the fairy tale marriage that was not yet a month old. But the royal show went on. These were the glory days for the Waleses, and, unknowing, the world loved them for their love. But with a marriage that was terminally damaged almost from the start, Charles's thoughts were often with Camilla.
She realised that he was so unhappy with Diana. I'm not saying whose fault it was, but was so miserable in that marriage, I would say within weeks of it, of the actual ceremony at St Paul's. I think that she gave such sympathy to Prince Charles and wanted to help so much and felt so much for this man, whom she adored, that I think very fast the affections that had been there, which both had tried to suppress, came flooding back, and she gave herself completely to Charles, and I think to the exclusion of her husband.
For a time, parenthood helped cement the royal marriage, but both parties acknowledged that it was over soon after the birth of Prince Harry. At this photo shoot on their bucket and spade holiday with King Juan Carlos of Spain, royal observers began to notice the body language between the so-called loving couple was frigid in the summer heat. Charles left early to return to the chillier pleasures of Balmoral and the company of Mrs. Parker Bowles. But it took time for Fleet Street to grasp what was going on. Too much had been invested in creating the royal dream to see it shattered quite so soon.
I was an executive on The Sun during the period in which questions began to be asked about whether or not Princess Diana and Charles were getting on. In many ways, what our reporters, Harry Arnold and Judy Wade, would come back and tell us, we didn't want to believe. They got the most severe questioning. Can you be right on this? Have you got a second source? OK, so she broke down in tears on that occasion, but perhaps he was just upset by something. It doesn't mean anything more, does it? And you would get Judy Wade saying, look at their body language, and we think, oh, God, this woman's an eccentric. She can't be right. We didn't want to believe it.
Occasionally, a lucky photographer would find evidence of the real story. But for the time being, the royal team kept up a united front for the outside world.
Fleet Street wanted the fairy tale and they wanted to enjoy it and they didn't want to question it. They never thought to question it. It sold lots of newspapers. Fairy tales are good for sales, and so it was fine with them. As far as they were concerned, this was the brilliant marriage of all time.
Cautiously, Charles and Camilla began to holiday together. In Turkey, where the British press failed to print the photographs, and then again, a very different kind of holiday from the ones Diana favoured. Another time they went to Florence, and to one very personal place of pilgrimage, the house paid for by King Edward VII, where Alice Keppel spent the Indian summer of her life. The couple indulged their love of painting, which has been one of the many points of mutual interest in their lives. Since the marriage, Diana and Camilla had barely met, but now at Sir James Goldsmith's house in Richmond in February 1989, there was an acrimonious encounter at a birthday party.
He expected to go on his own. Diana insisted on coming, and they went in the car together, and she remembers him as being very uncomfortable. And so she confronted Camilla. She asked her about the relationship. Camilla was evasive, and from that moment onwards, all Charles's friends and what she called dismissively the Highgrove set continued to perpetuate this lie that Charles and Camilla were just friends.
Revenge may not have been sweet, but it was effective. Through her friends, Diana told the whole story. The publication of Andrew Morton's book was more damaging to the House of Windsor than anything since the abdication. Camilla was named for the first time as Charles's lover.
It was a public finger being pointed at her by the one person who is able to manipulate the media, because she is very beautiful, the Princess of Wales, and can be very persuasive when she's in the right mood. And she had a nation crying with her or for her. Therefore, they had to have, if they've got her as the good fairy, they've got to have a wicked witch, and that was poor old Camille. And she got it right between the eyes.
June 1992. Named as the guilty accomplice in Charles's adultery, Camilla Parker Bowles is left, not for the last time, to cope alone. On the eve of publication of Andrew Morton's book, and with the contents already known, she braves the press by making an appearance at Smith's Lawn, the very place where 20 years before she sealed her love with Charles. She is invited to take tea with the Queen. Country houses with high walls and tight-lipped staff had for some time provided sanctuary. Garraby, Yorkshire seat of the Earl of Halifax. Eaton Hall, home of the Duchess of Westminster. Northmoor, owned by their friend Hugh Van Cutsum, and other houses secretly entertained the royal lovers. At Middlewick, Camilla's new home, the seeds of a disaster even greater than Andrew Morton's book were being sown. On January the 10th, 1993, the high-octane contents of a late-night telephone call, intercepted and taped 3 years before, were published in the newspapers. The Camilla Gate scandal was on.
I can't bear a Sunday night without you. It's like that programme Stop a week. I can't start the week without you.
Obviously, she was absolutely shattered, as anyone would be, because this was akin to allowing the general public into her bedroom, and it was a horrible thing to happen to anyone. Of course, the conversation was banal, even sort of mildly lavatorially obscene, but that is the way people talk sometimes, not for publication. It's a terrible intrusion, possibly the most painful intrusion of her life, I would say.
There was no protection against the ensuing press siege. Reaction against Camilla was swift and ferocious. Charles attempted to visit Camilla, huddled under rugs in the back seat of a chauffeur-driven car. The indignity of a future king forced to hide in such a way was not lost on the general public. But it was Camilla who bore the brunt of their disgust.
She was fighting, if that's the right word, with both hands tied behind her back. And she had nowhere to go, and it was obviously more difficult for her to see Prince Charles, who was by then her closest friend. Her girlfriends were about the only ones who could get to her at that time. She's got 4 or 5 very close lady friends. She had difficulty in going out in public, and therefore difficulty in communicating and seeing people.
As she emerged in customary silence from this latest controversy, it became clear that Camilla's problem was one of public perception. Whatever her attributes, and her friends claim there are many, she was inevitably and unfavourably compared with the Princess of Wales.
It's largely because of the way the two women look, and let's face it, the Princess of Wales looks a lot better than Mrs. Parker Bowles. Fine woman though she may well be, but Diana is still young and radiant and hugely attractive, photographs beautifully. Camilla photographs less well. Somehow her public perception just comes across as all wrong and all bad, and she infuriates people, and when her pictures appear in the newspapers, I know, newspaper editors are besieged with letters from readers. Why are you showing that woman's picture in your paper? We don't want to see her.
Charles had his own reputation to salvage after Camilla Gate. Oblivious to the consequences, he confessed to Jonathan Dimbleby on television that he had been an adulterer.
I think it was the most stupid, crass mistake of his life, and he's made a fair few mistakes. He's a good man. I'm sure in time he would be a good king, but that was a classic example of him being very badly advised and allowing himself to be so advised. It was a dirty thing to do. It left Camilla out with the washing. There was nothing for her to do or say. She couldn't come up and do her own television thing. There was nothing for her, and it then opened the floodgates of media intrusion because they could write what they liked without fear of contradiction. Once Prince Charles had said it himself, there was nothing more to be said. And this is a direct result of his own indecision with good and better advisers in the past, who he has failed to take note of, and they've all gone.
Do you think that Prince Charles actually thought about the effect on Camilla's family?
I sincerely hope that he didn't think about that, because if he did think about it and ignored it, it makes him a much worse person than I think he is. And certainly Wales did not show his correct friendship to her and the family, and, for that matter, to Andrew Parker Bowles.
In the wake of the Dimbleby interview, a massive face-saving disinformation campaign kicked in. One newspaper said Charles had given up Camilla, another claimed he would no longer take her calls. Yet another stated that Charles had abandoned Camilla 2 years before. The public felt they were being bamboozled. When the Princess of Wales confessed to Panorama that there were 3 in her marriage, Camilla's popularity sank to new depths. Once again, the opinion polls showed that it was Camilla who was bearing the brunt of public dismay. With the adultery now out in the open, Andrew Parker Bowles had little option but to call for a divorce. Ever resilient, he happily remarried to old friend Rosemary Pittman. Charles and Diana's own divorce followed soon after. Camilla started a new life here, alone, at Ray Mill House in Wiltshire, 10 miles from Highgrove. Set in 17 acres, it was bought and is administered by a trust headed by the Earl of Halifax. Losses in the Lloyd's insurance market, where she was a member of 10 different syndicates, have dramatically reduced her fortune and caused much-loved family heirlooms to be sold off at auction.
Well, Camilla was a very wealthy lady during her marriage. As you know, she was a member of Lloyd's List. When that crashed, she lost an awful lot of money. It's no secret that the Prince of Wales is helping her out in terms of her financing the house. and also he's providing his own staff to run errands for her, and also providing his own chauffeur when she needs to do trips to London, and probably with her charity work as well, and also she's just travelling around Wiltshire. Sadly, she is now almost a subject of daily paparazzi, so she can't go away unaided or unguarded in any way, so the Prince of Wales is helping her with that as well.
Driving from Raymill House one evening in June, Camilla was involved in a collision. She was on her way to Highgrove for dinner. The other driver was left trapped in a car in a ditch, and yet again Camilla's actions drew a welter of public criticism. Camilla and Charles continued to play a cautious game, Charles riding to hounds with a Beaufort hunt in the morning, Camilla in the afternoon. It seems to have occurred to neither that such a pursuit is not the easiest way to earn the public's approval.
By the laws of the church and old convention, she hasn't behaved terribly well. She has, it would appear, committed adultery with the Prince of Wales. But why is she held guilty for this? All she's guilty of is being there, being a very good, solid friend to him, and that friendship turned to something stronger.
I mean, he needs to be rehabilitated. There needs to be a long-term strategy for the Prince of Wales, and part of that strategy has to be Camilla Parker Bowles, how she fits into the circle, if you like.
Give it a few more years. It'll take a bit of time. They'll say, oh, she's behaved beautifully, which is true. She has kept her mouth shut, she's been discreet, she's been loyal, she's been decent, she's everything that really one admires in a person. And, God, these two have been in love now for 35 years. Why shouldn't we let them get married?
I think that if Camilla became Queen Camilla, Diana would go ballistic. For a long time, she's tried to come to terms with Camilla. But these days, she is glad that actually Camilla has taken Charles out of her life. In a way, Camilla's done Diana a favour. Diana married the wrong man, and Camilla's given her the excuse to get out of the marriage.
If Diana marries and finds happiness, which everyone wishes she would do and hopes she does at some stage in the future, then I think pressures will ease on Charles and Camilla. Public pressure will certainly ease. Public will take the view, well, Diana's found someone, she's happy, why on earth shouldn't Charles? And let's face it, we all know he loves Camilla.
This year, Camilla Parker Bowles celebrates her 50th birthday. In 25 years of knowing Prince Charles, she has probably experienced the pleasure that comes with love for no more than a week here and a week there.
Are we to condemn them in a way that we don't condemn any other people whose marriages break up? And the same for Camilla. She's a lonely lady, and clearly what the palace have is a big dilemma into how they actually do this. My belief is that the Prince of Wales will be the next king. There is no way that Prince William will jump that. There is no way that Prince Charles will marry Camilla Parker Bowles, but I believe they will be seen in public by the end of this year.
It should be quite simple for them to get married in due course if they wanted to, and it would be quite simple to alter the Constitution a tiny bit, if at all, to allow her to be the king's wife. She doesn't have to be called the Queen. Look at Prince Philip. Prince Philip is married to the Queen. What difference is it? It's just reversed, that's all. In the old days, the Queen was very much the lesser figure in a royal relationship. In modern times, this shouldn't bother anybody. She could be called Princess Camilla or the Duchess of anywhere you like, Sloane Square. Why not? I think they're entitled to each other. They've had all the hell. Why should they not have some pleasure?
Camilla's future lies in Charles's hands, but ever present is the knowledge that the future king cannot afford to make another mistake.
In the unreal world, it would have been lovely if he could have married her at the right time and you know, they were both single and it was all the fairy tale. We had the fairy tale that didn't work, and to me, that's terribly sad, but maybe now it's time to move forward and for everyone to find some happiness.
When Prince Charles married Diana, it was a fairy tale wedding. Alas, their loveless marriage ended in separation after 11 years. Prince Andrew, the Queen's second son, married Sarah. Their marriage too ended in separation after just 6 years. The royal husbands failed to live up to expectations. It was all too much for the royal wives of Windsor. They were a new breed of royalty, young and attractive, independent and unwilling to bow to a system they considered stuffy and old-fashioned. They projected a new image of royalty and captured the attention of the world. Alas, behind this image, the truth was different. Stories of their real lives leaked out. Diana as a lonely, unhappy princess suffering from bulimia and married to an uncaring man with a mistress. With Andrew away at sea, the lonely Sarah sought male company elsewhere. Her extramarital relationships were exposed when she was caught in the south of France with her lover. Diana, Princess of Wales, and Sarah, Duchess of York, brought a sense of scandal and fun to the traditional circles of British monarchy. Alas, they were forced to stand aside when their royal secrets were revealed. Were they really to blame for their marriage breakdowns, or were they simple victims of a system that had not kept up to date with the times? On a visit to India in 1992, the charade of Diana's marriage to Charles was almost over. At 31, Diana faced a future denied of married love, of which she dreamed since her unhappy childhood. Officially, her relationship with Charles was still a happy one, but gradually it shifted to one of mutual indifference. Diana increasingly acquired a sense of destiny. The flame for Charles flickered and died. In a clumsy attempt to prove publicly his affection for her, the prince tried to kiss his wife. She rebuffed his advances. The dam, it seemed, was about to burst. Sarah, Duchess of York, now accepts that she was simply not cut out to join the royal family. She admitted in a newspaper interview that she had messed up her life. "We all make serious mistakes and we learn from them," she claimed. For Sarah, it's been a difficult time, but she always put on a happy face and fulfilled her royal duties with dignity. When she married Andrew, she took on the role of a duchess enthusiastically and looked forward to supporting her husband.
She had high expectations of her marriage with Andrew, perhaps a little too high. I think she really hoped that it would be something that it perhaps wasn't.
Diana's shy-die image was in sharp contrast to Sarah's extrovert manner. A professional woman, an expert skier, Sarah had a career in publishing. She was confident of her own identity and seemed far more prepared than Diana for the pitfalls of a royal marriage under the intense scrutiny of the media.
But here was Gerald Sarah, who was a complete breath of fresh air, you know, who loved sort of larking about and having the odd glass of champagne. It was very much frowned upon, but I mean, it was just fun. It was just giggly. It was relaxation. It was an ally. They could have a good old gossip about how ghastly the situation was.
When Sarah first appeared on the royal scene, skiing holidays meant happier times for Diana, but her influence was not always appreciated by Charles, who was irritated by their girlish behaviour in front of the press.
The whole thing actually was a bit embarrassing. So they came over as a bit sort of immature, really. It wasn't a good thing to do.
Sarah Ferguson brought a breath of fresh air to the stuffy royal circles. They made an attractive couple. He was a dashing naval officer, she his exuberant partner. Together, Sarah and Andrew projected a united front.
We're a good team, anyway.
Yes, I think that's a saving grace. It's the fact that in the last 9 months we've discovered that we work very well together.
We're good friends, good team. Very happy.
The Queen was relieved when Andrew married Sarah. She was happy to see her son betrothed after his many adventures with less suitable companions. She felt that Andrew had met his match in Sarah, boding well for a strong relationship. At the wedding ceremony, she vowed to love and honour, but not to obey him. The couple's own mood of vitality and genuine happiness seemed to rub off, creating an unusually festive royal occasion. The Queen never looked happier or more relaxed. Sadly, it was the last time the royal family would present such a genuinely united front. Sarah was not a purebred English rose in the mould of her friend and royal confidant Princess Diana. In the early days, family gatherings at polo brought the two girls closer together. For once, Diana could stay in the background and let her sister-in-law do the honours. Sarah was roped in for the prize giving. Come rain or shine, a royal consort must perform her duties. On this occasion, it's all in the family. Brother-in-law Charles is in the winning team, and the young Prince William is there to give his support. Another close friend of the royal family was Sarah's father, Major Ronald Ferguson, who was Prince Charles's polo manager for almost 20 years. Diana and Sarah first met at a polo match and together brought valuable new blood into a royal house of essentially German stock. Now British royalty will certainly be able to claim a more British ancestry. But how would these two lively young women fit into the traditions of monarchy and the atmosphere of royal palaces?
If you go into Buckingham Palace, I mean, if I've ever been there, it's very hushed and everybody's sort of tiptoeing around. And it's like being in a hospital, you know? And I'm sure suddenly these two women would come along and they'd probably have a good giggle at something and everybody would turn around almost like they were in a library and go, shh. And I'm sure that they found that very restricting, that they really couldn't just be themselves there.
As Duchess of York, Sarah embraced her royal duties with enthusiasm. Within a year of their wedding, they visited Canada. Sarah's passion for life and general bravado was greatly admired, and the young couple's relaxed manner won the hearts of the Canadian people. Obviously still very much in love, Sarah and Andrew were a huge hit.
They were very, very physically attracted. And all the time we were with them on that tour, we used to feel that we needed a bucket of cold water to throw over them. They were so tactile, obviously in love, and that's very infectious. They communicated this wonderful feeling of happiness to everybody around them, and it made it a joy to work with them. And that's why it was such a tragedy when they split up, because we had seen how happy they were. We hadn't seen this obvious affection with Charles and Diana, only for a very, very short time. But with Andrew and Sarah, it was clear that they were meant for each other and so happy together, and they worked so well together as a team. And it just brought joy to the Canadians and to everybody who saw them.
For Diana, looking good is important. Fashion is a way to express herself. In public, she relishes the opportunity to dress up and perform for her audience. She doesn't smoke, rarely drinks alcohol, exercises regularly, and swims in a cold pool every morning. On official occasions, she pushes food around the plate, rarely eats meat, and sticks to small portions of fish and salads, going to great lengths to maintain her appearance.
That Diana had this extraordinary relationship with the camera. It's the same kind of thing that Marilyn Monroe had, or perhaps Jackie Kennedy. Now, there's a very good example, because there are a lot of parallels here between Jackie Kennedy as the president's wife and Princess Diana as wife of the heir to the throne of England. It was after she learned how to present herself that she became both the greatest asset of the royal family in terms of her visual style and her fashion and the wonderful way she looked, and also a problem in that she did in a way show up what looked rather fusty side of the royal family.
A good performer, Diana never forgets which way the cameras are pointing.
Don't you think we see in Diana the essence of her character, something that goes very deep, which is a really desperate desire to please? She wants to make other people feel at ease. She wants all the things that a broken home, a difficult childhood didn't give her. She wants to feel that other people are at ease in her presence. Diana reflects how she feels in the clothes that she wears. When she's feeling good about herself, when she's in the public arena, she'll wear short, snappy suits, very short skirts these days. And when she's feeling bad, she covers herself up. You see her whole body more hunched. She wears big sweaters, long skirts. And there are those occasions when she's really feeling blue, when she tends to wear blue, something long and droopy, like that outfit just after the revelations about the breakdown of her marriage.
Diana creates a mystique so powerful that her public is still unwilling to hear any criticism of her. Fashion writers acclaim her sense of style.
The way she can wear those dinner suits. She wore this one with what's called a trompe-l'oeil. It's a kind of fake waistcoat at the front, fake vest. And it was so trim and neat and very smart, and yet at the same time it's sort of funny. It's a take on menswear. It's also a joke on those stuffed shirts that British men, not least her husband, have to wear on official occasions. It's a tremendous fun outfit, her looking at her best.
On a visit to Hong Kong, Diana wore a strapless Catherine Walker cream gown with a short matching jacket with a high-standing collar, topped off by the dazzling Queen Mary tiara.
Diana doesn't like wearing tiaras, and she particularly doesn't like the one that the Queen gave her, which is very pretty but is heavy. And she wears much more the Spencer tiara with the rather interlacing of the diamonds, which is very pretty. But of course she also, on official occasions, like at the Malaysian state banquet, when she wore that green dress by Victor Edelstein, very slim dress, that went with the Queen Mary emeralds, she wears the Queen's personal gift, which is the Royal Family Order. It's got a little picture of the Queen surrounded by diamonds, and that's a very special mark of affection. And it's one of those things that shows to other members of the royal family, look, the Queen gave me this. I'm one of them.
Separated from Charles alone at the D-Day ceremonies, her legs were regally displayed.
Have you noticed with Diana how her skirt, her hemline and her shoe heels have gone up now that she feels more independent and better about herself? Those Jimmy Choo shoes she wore, a young British designer who makes lively shoes, quite expensive. They cost £250, nearly $500 a pair. But they give Diana the right kind of look. Slightly sexy, isn't it? And something that makes her look like an independent young woman.
On a trip to Australia, the press was quick to take advantage of all the bronzed bodies on display. Often in her desire to please, Diana is accused of becoming a chameleon. Psychologists claim that her self-esteem is so low that she feels she exists only when she takes on the colouring of her surroundings. She mixes easily. She is a princess in Kensington, a Sloane Ranger in Knightsbridge, and a very ordinary girl when in conversation with Australian lifeguards. She's never at a loss to expose her sexuality when the occasion arises.
And she knew the effect she had on men. She was very, very aware of it, and she used it to great advantage. They were all putty in her hands. And I remember looking at it once and thinking, what is she saying with that look? And I decided that what she was saying was, you know I'm gorgeous, I think I'm gorgeous, but remember, I'm taken.
During her unhappy marriage to Charles, Diana suffered from the slimming disease bulimia nervosa, but since those dark days she has regained her confidence and her food preferences are common knowledge. She is known to prefer pasta with creamy sauces like carbonara. She likes potatoes and bacon sandwiches with white bread and cheese. Despite this, she keeps her figure trim.
Now, for a silhouette, a narrow silhouette, you need to be slim. And so, of course, she had to work at slimming down. So there's been the swimming at Buckingham Palace in that pool. She's done that very religiously, swum a tremendous amount. The gym, she now has a personal trainer coming to her the whole time. Diana also goes in for a lot of beauty therapy, aromatherapy, massage. She spends a very great deal of money, if you like to look at it in financial terms, on the infrastructure. That's what I'd call it. We're not talking about the makeup here, although she's been wearing increasingly quite a lot of makeup. But we're not talking about cosmetics. We're talking about the foundations here.
Ballet is still her great passion. She grew too tall to pursue her own ambition to dance, but now channels her enthusiasm into supporting the professionals. Privately, she continued to use dance as part of an exercise routine for many years, and although swimming now maintains her high level of fitness, watching rehearsals is still a favourite occupation. On formal visits, Diana must not be caught off guard. Her skirt must not blow up, and the correct length of dress is all important. She charmed her hosts on an official visit to Japan by wearing a new evening dress created by the Japanese designer Yuki with a headband of diamonds and sapphires. In Hungary, she wore an outfit by Catherine Walker and a hat by Philip Somerville. She dazzled the people of Indonesia. In Washington, a slinky evening gown by Hachi stunned onlookers. In Paris, she wore a new gown by Victor Edelstein, the bodice and the small bolero jacket encrusted with shimmering beads. Hats, too, were a favourite with Diana. Most of them come from Philip Somerville, who produces the most flattering hats in London. Now officially out of the royal family, Diana feels embittered that they did not appreciate what she had done to improve their image.
I think she'd be quite justified in feeling bitter because there was a gap in the royal ranks before she came along for a young, glamorous woman, somebody who wasn't as aloof and dowdy as the rest of them. Somebody once said, a newspaper columnist once said, that the royal members of the royal family, especially the women, have the strange ability to make expensive designer clothes worth thousands, look like they came from British home stores, you know, the retail chain. And Diana was the exception to that. She was like an Afghan hound amongst all the corgis, elegant, tall. She had everything. She had everything that the public expected of a woman in that position and that the rest of them didn't have. They were a dumpy, frumpy lot. And then along came this gorgeous girl who gave them the polish, the glamour that they lacked. And now that she's retired, once again there's this gap in the royal ranks, and it's not going to be filled in the same way until William gets himself a wife or a fiancée.
Royal status for Sarah meant royal duties. She performed these in her own personal, relaxed manner. Her independence and modern ideas were at odds with the formality and protocol of the British monarchy. Living in a gilded cage was not her idea of being royal. Her dress sense came in for a lot of public attention. As a naval officer, Andrew was away at sea for almost 9 months of the year. Their time together was very precious, and stolen kisses showed their youthful love. They revelled in each other's company, but moments like this were rare. For most of the time, they were forced to live apart, and Sarah found the stress of being alone hard to bear. With a natural zest for life, she needed the buzz of excitement. When Andrew wasn't around, she found life within the royal confines rather dull. To relieve the tedium, she took her pilot's license. Flying was a way of life for Andrew, and she wanted to find out more about her husband's work. Not to be outdone, she also decided to fly helicopters.
I now know exactly what he's talking about when he goes out on the sorties, so that's what I wanted to achieve. So when he comes back in the evening and tells me what he's been doing, I now know what he's been doing.
With Andrew away so much, Sarah was often on duty alone.
How are you doing in this sun? Not getting too hot, are you? Simon? Yes. Oh, that's a nice name, isn't it?
Called upon to present trophies at polo matches, Sarah was often ensnared in the company of attractive men. Before she became part of the royal family, she had had a 4-year love affair with the millionaire Formula One racing entrepreneur Paddy McNally. Sarah enjoyed the attention of the company of men, and in Andrew's absence she turned to her father for support, putting him in the spotlight. Ronald Ferguson was Prince Charles's polo manager. A ceremonial stick marked the end of his many years as deputy chairman of the Guards Polo Club, after the press revealed details of his visits to a massage parlour in London's West End. The club committee had voted him out, and the message was clear. It was an emotional farewell under a cloud of scandal. Sarah was on hand to support him in a brave show of solidarity. For both of them, it was a case of putting on a stiff upper lip. With an absentee husband, the media quickly focused on Sarah's performance as a single mum. Sarah was performing her public duties in a style the cameras had come to expect. Unfairly, she was lampooned. Determined to be herself, she chose to support good causes, but in her own way. Her lack of regard for the cool, stuffy performance left her wide open to criticism from royal officials.
Not anything at all. And I haven't prepared a speech, but I just am so pleased to be here today. I mean, it's just wonderful. I mean, it's not very much snow, and I think you've done a fantastic job.
There was fierce criticism that her speeches and general behaviour were too unconventional and familiar. The press often made disparaging comments on her dress sense. But she was determined to survive the icy disapproval of Buckingham Palace, and her confidence to handle the situation and dismiss the establishment was demonstrated by her liberated and relaxed fashion of bare legs, short skirts and smiles all round, and a new shorter hairstyle, assertive body language of a new woman.
It's certainly true in the 20s that when people said, shocking, shocking, those women cutting off their hair, they knew something about women, that women were asserting their independence. When did Diana first start going public with the troubles in her marriage? When she chopped off her hair. When did Sarah Ferguson start saying, I want to be independent, I'm fed up with these courtiers and this palace protocol? She chopped off that wonderful red hair that is Fergie's crowning glory.
Sadly, Sarah's own guarded manner was to be her downfall. In a fashionable block of flats in London's Chelsea, her passionate nature and her zest for life were suddenly exposed to the world when holiday photographs featuring Princess Beatrice and Texan oil millionaire Steve Wyatt were discovered by a window cleaner. Allegations of Sarah's infidelity confirmed gossip that her marriage to Andrew was on the rocks. In the eyes of the establishment, the lonely royal mother had failed to progress from commoner to royalty. Under the pressure of a crumbling marriage and in the full glare of publicity, Andrew and Sarah tried to continue with their daily lives. Andrew carried out his duties as a naval officer, while Sarah took their 3-year-old daughter Beatrice to and from school. After weeks of speculation, the announcement of the York separation was finally made. Details emerged after the Queen's solicitor and a team of lawyers had discussed exactly how it would be arranged, including the custody of the children. Questions were asked why the marriage had hit the rocks.
I think the main reason is because they were apart so much. I mean, I think that must be a very major factor. I mean, the fact that they obviously had close friendships, both of them, with people outside the marriage, I think contributed to it. But I think initially, I think it was the fact that he was a sailor, he was abroad a great deal. And I felt very sorry for Fergie, and that, you know, when she used to go to she went to Australia, didn't she? And there was a great outcry about the number of holidays she had and so on. And yet all the poor girl was doing was going to see her husband, you know. And I think that was one of the major problems. There were too many absences.
Forces within Buckingham Palace closed ranks. Stories were leaked that Sarah's extravagant and irresponsible lifestyle had caused the marriage breakup. Reports that the Queen was unhappy were confirmed when the press claimed that the knives were out for Fergie. Without Andrew, Sarah had no royal protection.
When he was away, she was very vulnerable to the, shall we say, the Machiavellian courtiers who didn't like the way she behaved and decided that they had to rein her in very sharply. Now, being a redhead with a bit of a temper, she didn't take kindly to the methods they used. I think if they'd been more subtle, if they'd been more understanding, more diplomatic, the situation could have been avoided. But they were determined that she would do things their way. And she was a very independent, free-spirited girl who was not going to take kindly to the sexism and the patronising attitudes at the palace. And therefore, the end result was disaster.
Now Sarah was suffering the consequences of a job she couldn't fulfill. Buckingham Palace closed its doors on her. The truth lay in her loneliness and the pressures of being royal.
When she tried to explain to the Duke when he came home the problems that she had, he just wanted to relax. He didn't want to hear about problems. He wanted just to have a good time for the brief period he was home. And he used to say, well, look, darling, you know, I don't have those problems. I can't understand it. You know, they're not like that with me. Aren't you sure this is right? You know, he wasn't sympathetic. And in the end, she decided that life was better on the outside.
Andrew responded with a round of public engagements. Outwardly untouched by the scandal, plans were already underway for Sarah to move out of their family house with the young princesses and into rented accommodation down the road. When asked, he declined to answer questions about his marriage breakup. It had all begun so well, royal marriages off to a good start with spontaneous signs of affection and happiness, heirs to the throne and a promised future built on mutual support and public partnership. All the Queen's grandchildren are products of broken marriages, yet set against the power and ceremony of British royalty, the dreams faded. Diana, still officially living with Charles but in an unhappy marriage, took note at the palace's treatment of her sister-in-law.
I think Diana was shocked by what happened to Sarah and determined that it would not happen to her. When she heard, you know, that famous phrase, the knives are out for Fergie, I think she realised that when you walk out, that's liable to happen to anyone who flouts the conventions and tries to stand up to the Windsors, and she was determined not to repeat Sarah's mistakes.
Diana's strength and character pulled her through the next few months. The strains of her own marriage breakdown and the truth of her relationship with Charles was about to explode on the British public. The book Diana, Her True Story went on sale. The romantic image of a loving royal couple was shattered. Charles was exposed as an uncaring husband and adulterer. These revelations were the beginning of Charles's downfall and threatened the very institution of the British monarchy. The royal wives of Windsor were to blame.
Some people may say that they were dragging the royal family down. Others thought that they provided a much-needed lightness and more reality into a very stuffy old institution. I mean, if the worst thing you can be accused of is prodding somebody with an umbrella, I don't think that's such a bad thing to do. They were girls having fun. The things they did, they didn't expect most of the time to be made public. And, you know, let's face it, they weren't robbing banks or shooting people, and I think a lot was made out of very, very little.
On the surface, it was business as usual. The estranged husbands put on a royal face to attend a family wedding. When a crisis occurs in a royal marriage, the palace machine puts its full weight behind the blood royal. Now, with the gloves off, Charles had been advised to dump Diana immediately and seek a divorce. Just for one day at least, marriage difficulties within the royal family were put to one side as they turned out in force to enjoy a royal wedding which might prove successful. Sarah had been the one missing guest, but at another marriage ceremony, her eldest daughter, Princess Beatrice, was bridesmaid. The Queen's granddaughter, a new generation of royalty, enjoyed the limelight usually taken by her mother. Diana, meanwhile, continued with her public engagements alone, except for the company of her sons, who enjoyed the experience of meeting film stars at opening nights. This was the image of new royalty at work, single mums teaching their children the ropes. Public interest in the broken royal marriages remained high. Photographed alone taking the children to school, the press attention turned back to Sarah. After revelations of her association with the Texan oil millionaire Steve Wyatt, public interest now centred around another Texan, Johnny Bryan. His cover as Sarah's financial advisor was blown wide open after photographs appeared of the almost naked couple cavorting on holiday together in the south of France. It was a royal exposure without precedent, and the press had a field day. Sarah's alleged lover, Johnny Bryan, failed to get an injunction to stop publication of the very revealing photographs, and the media onslaught continued. Eventually, Johnny Bryan and Sarah were successful in winning a court battle in France against intrusion of their privacy by a French freelance photographer. At the time the photographs appeared in the press, Sarah was on holiday with her children with the Queen at Balmoral.
Well, I know the Duchess was so upset that they had to twice call the doctor, the local doctor at Balmoral, to come and attend to her. She was absolutely distraught, quite understandably. And it was a bombshell for the Queen, for the entire royal family. It was one more devastating blow in a very, very bad year.
Sarah insisted that Johnny Bryan was merely her financial advisor. As a house guest of the Queen at Balmoral, the embattled Duchess found the situation difficult to explain.
Worst of all, of course, to Sarah, because she was right there in the enemy camp when this news broke. And how could she possibly explain it away? The evidence was all too overwhelming. So I think that probably was the worst time of her life.
Diana's unhappy marriage meant she was spending more time away from the royals. Sarah needed the understanding of an outsider, so turned to her sister-in-law for support.
Diana was sympathetic, and she was, you know, visiting her and trying to support her, but I think the Duchess was beyond any kind of support or sympathy. She was just totally devastated by it.
Continuing to protest his innocence, Johnny Bryan became the centre of massive public interest and debate.
No further comment to make in addition to the comments and statements I made last night. Have you seen the...
Newspapers claimed that the photographs were published to strip away the hypocrisy surrounding the couple's relationship. The French freelance photographer who took them made £500,000 from worldwide sales.
Once he knew that Fergie was there,
I don't personally know whether he knew who she was there with or how he found out she was there, but as you can imagine, there's a chain of command, chain of bookings, of flights, of villas, there's the police protection service. There are endless ways that information could get out. I think the royal family's always needed a black sheep. For many years it was Princess Margaret, then it was Princess Anne, recently it's been Fergie. And of course the Mirror's publication of those photographs, while she happened to be the Queen's guest at Balmoral and was banished that very day, was the low point of Fergie's relationship with the British public, really, and with royal life. And since then she's been an ex-royal. The Mirror, of course, made an awful lot of money and put on an enormous amount of circulation by printing those photographs. So although it was a continuing saga of circulation war among the tabloids, it was also an irresistible story whichever one had got hold of it.
Immediately, the royal publicity machine went on the defensive. Prince Andrew claimed that the photographs were a set-up. Stories were hatched that Sarah was suffering from a nervous breakdown. Even the Queen doubted that Sarah would ever be able to shoulder official duties again. When the story broke, Sarah, Andrew and the children were the holiday guests of the Queen at Balmoral Castle. The newspaper headlines exploded like a bombshell at the royal breakfast table. The Duchess of York left Balmoral in disgrace. Sarah had to face the reality that the royal family no longer considered her a member. With her children, she boarded a flight for London and virtual exile. The official line was that Sarah had always intended to leave Balmoral at this time. Normal royal life resumed in Scotland as though nothing untoward had happened. The royal family, including Prince Andrew, attended morning service at the local church. It was just like any other Sunday with the crowds coming out to watch. When Sarah arrived at Heathrow, there was little thought of future plans, except perhaps to visit her mother in Argentina. Her main concern was to head for the sanctuary of home as quickly as possible. After her traumatic departure from the royal family and the return to her besieged home, Ramenda Lodge, Sarah needed help. In the hope that somewhere there was somebody she could really trust, she turned to therapy.
I would say now to anybody that, if they've been through problems, that it's good just to talk to somebody who you know you can trust. I mean, my particular position, you don't know who you're going to trust at all. You're suspicious of everybody because you trusted and do trust still too much, and then you get betrayed and let down, and then all that starts. I think that the most important thing, if anyone goes through this sort of thing, is for the sake of the children and for the sake of your own self, is that you've got a great friendship. You're always going to have a great friendship. There doesn't need to be animosity. And Andrew and I really have a good, deep friendship, and that's good.
After Sarah's dramatic departure from Scotland, the royal family continued with their summer holiday. For the moment at least, peace and tranquility returned to the Scottish Highlands. The palace announced that no significant developments were expected in the next few days. Yet the family holiday was about to be disrupted once more. The privacy of the Scottish estate was again invaded by the press. Transcripts appeared in newspapers of a bugged telephone conversation allegedly between the Princess of Wales, endearingly referred to as Squidgy, and her friend James Gilby. The recording revealed a princess in turmoil, deeply troubled, lonely and vulnerable, pathetically grateful for the attention of her male confidant. During their intimate exchange, she discusses her unhappy marriage, her remoteness from her in-laws, and her tortuous lifestyle.
It's just so difficult, so complicated. It makes my life real torture, I've decided.
Lonely and without friends in the royal family, Diana turned to the Queen Mother for support.
It's affection. It's affection. It's definitely affection. It's sort of, It's affection? Yeah, definitely. Is it? It's not hostile, anyway. No, she's sort of fascinated by me, but doesn't quite know how to unravel it. Yeah.
Despite Diana's recorded protestation that she had done so much for the royal family, officials dismissed the tapes as inconclusive.
So that was it. I was very bad last and he started blubbering. I just felt really sad and full of empty. I thought, bloody hell, what have I done for this family?
The Sun newspaper reported that the Secret Service MI5 was behind the recordings. Newspaper reports claim that the government's official electronic eavesdropping station was responsible. In the interests of national security, MI5 monitors royal telephone conversations to gain knowledge about their movements and acquaintances. A more sinister view is that Charles needed evidence of his wife's infidelity.
It was in Charles's interest, and perhaps the palace's interest, no one else's, that Diana's phones be bugged, and bugged they were. She knew that herself and had complained to the Queen's private secretary, Sir Robert Fellows, that her apartments were bugged and they needed debugging, and indeed they were cleaned up. What wasn't cleaned up was what was happening on the line from her apartments to the outside world, and most experts concur that it was between, let us say, her phone and the general switchboard that a bug was placed. What's disturbing is not that Diana was bugged necessarily, because that was, the excuse could have been the national interest, but that the eventual recording was cleaned up with a very sophisticated device called a digital adapter filter. This sort of thing that would be needed would cost about £35,000 and would normally only be available to the security services or to the military. So that was used, it was cleaned up, and after it was cleaned up, it was spliced together. There are joins in the, audible joins of milliseconds in the conversation, and then it was rebroadcast.
Rebroadcast using a mobile telephone to disguise their sources. This way the perpetrators ensured that the taped conversation was picked up accidentally by amateur radio hams. By contacting the press, this telephone evidence confirmed that Diana was unhappy in her marriage to Charles and needed the support and love of a male companion. Exposed by the tapes and now hounded by the press, there is no doubt that James Gilby helped Diana through her crisis. Lonely, depressed and spied upon, Diana spent many years waiting to be heard by a man with a sympathetic and understanding ear.
She was a very lonely, vulnerable woman who needed a shoulder to cry on, and he provided it. I think she needed some sort of buffer between her and the enemies that's what she thought of. I think the people that surrounded her at that time. She needed somebody who was not one of them to turn to advise her and as a sort of sounding board. And he was the perfect answer, somebody she could trust, she could confide in, and unfortunately their relationship became public.
Diana's critics claimed that the tapes confirmed her tendency towards paranoia.
If she does have a tendency, I think it's quite justified. I think anybody in that position should feel they're surrounded by assassins night and day, because once the tapes emerged, and she found out about them long before the public did, she was worried that quite rightly, that she was being bugged, that she was being spied upon, and she was. So any paranoia she felt, I think she was entirely right.
It troubles Diana deeply that her own sons will be the products of a broken home. Diana had seen her own parents split up when she was a child and knew what grief it could cause on young children. She's directed much of her public work to promoting family values. Her main concern has been the importance of physical contact. Tactile by nature, she's voiced her belief in its benefits, particularly for children.
Hugging has no harmful side effects. If we all play our part in making our children feel valued, the result will be tremendous. There are potential huggers in every household.
Always the focus of hugs and kisses herself, Diana represents a new, more acceptable type of royalty. No other member of the British royal family can make such immediate contact with the public. Their admiration is genuine and their acts of affection spontaneous. This huge popularity will be her main weapon in her fight for a fair settlement with Charles. As an indication to the way forward as an independent princess with international status, Diana visited Zimbabwe. Using her high profile to focus media attention onto the hidden problems of one of Africa's small countries, she uses her public position for the benefit of the world's sick and needy from an international charity platform. An independent Sarah found a role for herself drawing attention to the plight of children the world had forgotten.
No? You want your mummy back? You've got lovely eyes, you have. You've got lovely eyes.
Czy tylko w Polsce, czy za granicą też? Tych
Za
sponsorów?
granicą w zasadzie też, głównie z Niemiec.
Yeah,
Z Niemiec.
they send a lot of letters to Germany, and they get German sponsors, and the films from Poland.
And how old is Kasia now?
Ja, wiele Kasia ma lat.
Będzie miała 6 lat.
She will be 6 years, kiedy?
W grudniu.
In December. She will be 6 in December.
Right. She's exactly the same age as Beatrice then, right?
Leading the charity Children in Crisis, Sarah is putting her past behind her and with her own brand of enthusiasm. Although with less exposure, she is helping to raise money to support her charitable activities.
She's still doing a lot of work with these charities, and she's still trying to get a profile for them. And even though it's a lot harder for her now, but she's still working for them. And I think with Diana, I'm sure too, although it's not obvious at the moment, I'm sure she's still doing the same. And I think, you know, the charities sorely miss having that public image.
With the serious side of charity work comes the glamour of fundraising first nights. This is where Diana's talents as a performer come into their own. She plays the part of a fairy tale princess with apparent ease. Her glamorous image has fueled the media's obsession with her. On an official visit to Egypt, her morning swim was intruded upon by a group of sensation-hungry photographers spying from a high-rise balcony. Both she and her detective were aware they were being watched, but she chose to ignore them, resigned yet again to being forced back onto centre stage by her relentless audience. Diana is a victim of her own success, with the media branded as the villain of the piece, the reason she gave for reducing her public engagements and her prominent royal position.
When I started my public life 12 years ago, I understood the media might be interested in what I did, but I was not aware of how overwhelming that attention would become, nor the extent to which it would affect both my public duties and my personal life in a manner that's been hard to bear.
I don't think that any marriage that is as unhappy as the Waleses was can survive the kind of press intrusion that it had. Absolutely not. I think that it would have been extraordinary if it had survived. Because once the press have a little inkling that something's wrong, they go for it. They really go for it. And of course, it's probably the greatest story that Fleet Street ever had in the last 50 years.
Often accused of smothering her children, William and Harry are incredibly fond of their mother. Her sons were her main solace during the years of her marriage breakdown. Now she has to bear the loneliness of her new situation as an officially separated wife. Diana has replaced the Queen as the nation's primary mother figure by announcing the importance her sons will have on her future life.
My first priority will continue to be our children, William and Harry, who deserve as much love and care and attention as I am able to give, as well as an appreciation of the tradition into which they were born.
She's very anxious to avoid any publicity, which is perhaps understandable, but the way she's going about it is perhaps not the wisest way. So she's the first victim. The charities naturally are the second victim. The royal family is also suffering because she was a great asset, and wherever she went, she appealed greatly to the public, and she was the very modern young face of the royal family, which was very, very useful, a great asset to them all round.
A year after her official separation from Charles, Diana joins the royal family for the Christmas Day service at Sandringham Church and again took centre stage. Shortly afterwards, however, she left abruptly to spend the rest of Christmas alone. Until now, the magnetism of royalty has helped to make royal engagements a powerful medium for promoting its causes. It remains to be seen whether Diana's future detachment from the royal family will affect its pulling power. Diana leaves an unfillable gap in the royal lineup. Sadly, there's no longer a real role for her in the royal family.
Whatever small role she still has, she'll be seen as just the mother of the next king but one, Prince William. she may not even have the title Princess of Wales anymore. It's very doubtful. They may invent some new title for her, like Duchess of Kensington, for instance, to give her a title that tells the public that she is no longer the wife of the heir to the throne and no longer Princess of Wales and no longer the third lady in the land.
Since her marriage to Charles, Diana has received little guidance from within the palace. She has had to find her own way. In an attempt to escape from an unhappy marriage, she exposed a side of royalty which has done immeasurable damage to the institution of the monarchy. Diana stands accused of being disloyal to her husband and to the Queen.
They certainly backfired on her and on the family, and I don't think she appreciated just what the public reaction to those revelations would be, or that it would quickly become apparent that she was behind all the leaks.
The experiment of bringing commoners into the House of Windsor has failed, and royalty can no longer set an example of happy family life. The two young wives have gone, and all that is left is the shell of respectability and tradition. Neither had set out to challenge time-honoured customs, but their effect on the whole image of the British monarchy has been dramatic. Together, they've opened up a new line of questioning on an institution that must move with the times if it is to survive into the 21st century. As mothers to the Queen's grandchildren, they still have an important role to play in the lives of the next royal generation.